tonight, and a former RAF squadron leader says a Chinook helicopter which crashed in Kintyre in 1994 was on a show flight to prove to the Army that it was safe. 4 crew and 25 passengers were killed when the helicopter, which was carrying senior security personnel from Northern Ireland to Fort George near Inverness, went down in foggy conditions. Initially, the crash was blamed on pilot error, but they were both exonerated in 2011. The families of the victims have been calling for the release of documents linked to the accident, which have been sealed for 100 years, but that has been rejected by the UK government. Let's hear more on this with retired squadron leader Robert Burke, who was unit test pilot based at RAF Oddaham at the time of the crash, and Burke-Stephens, who's the solicitor which represents the families of those who were killed. Good morning to both of you, gentlemen. If I can come to you, squadron leader Robert Burke, you're now saying that the Chinook helicopter was on a show flight, you described it. What makes you say that?
I stated this in the past. It's in many documents because there have been many requests from me to give evidence. The problem was that the introduction into RAF service of the Mark II Chinook was bodged. It was a disaster from beginning to end. You can look at the Public Accounts Committee report on this very thing, and it's an even worse introduction to service with the Chinook Mark III, which never actually made it into service. And there were all sorts of questions about the safety of the aircraft. Indeed, the MOD were suing Boeing Lycoming at the time of the crash over an aircraft trial in the States, which went wrong, a Chinook engine test in the States. And this long-delayed introduction to service, which has upset the Army both operationally and for their training programs, was leading to a lot of problems for the Army. And the Chinook, after all, is an Army support helicopter operated by the RAF. And so there came this opportunity of the introduction of the Chinook Mark II to Northern Ireland, which the Chinook flight in Northern Ireland didn't want. They wanted they wanted an old Mark I back because they knew it was reliable. But this aircraft was sent off largely as a political gesture to prove to the Army that the aircraft was safe. There's my answer.
So you're basically saying that the RAF wanted, the irony being that the RAF wanted to show the Army it was safe, and what made, the MOD made the Army use the Mark II that went down that night? The RAF wanted to demonstrate that the aircraft was safe and they could put their most trusted and valuable list of passengers in the context of the security operation in Northern Ireland on board altogether. What a silly decision. You've mentioned that you've made this claim before, but there has been, I know that you've appeared before select committees and in a BBC documentary. I don't think this has been brought out before.
It hasn't been emphasised before, no.
Why do you think it hasn't?
Probably pressure from the senior members of the Ministry of Defence, I would guess. I can't make a definitive statement on that. I can only say what I think.
Let me bring in Burke-Stephens, who represents the families of those who died that night. Mark, what are the families making of this news from retired squadron leader Robert Burke?
Well, I think they're pretty horrified, as you would imagine. One of the things that provoked me to act for the families pro bono was because of this injustice, and obviously people of good conscience like Squadron Leader Burke have come forward with information. There are others as well. And that's quite important because the MOD, say a public inquiry, wouldn't identify any new evidence. But of course, this information is new. Also, the families have found a yacht captain who was sailing along the same route towards the Mull and said that the aircraft was flying below the cloud base and had a clear sight of the Mull, just as he did, with the top of the Mull being clothed in mist. So that we know that the pilots from that information will have had very clear view of the Mull, so it's very unlikely that you're going to fly into it if you've seen it. And so
you've
there's
just
quite
said
a lot more information.
Yeah, you've said there that what Squadron Leader Burke has told us is new. He said he's made these claims before, and I suppose one of the reasons that the MOD say they can't accept a demand for a new public inquiry, they've given us a statement. He says it's unlikely that a public inquiry would identify any new evidence or reach any new conclusions on the basis of existing evidence. Mr Burke said this evidence was out there, it just wasn't highlighted.
Well, maybe we're right, Laura, but there may be a reason that it wasn't highlighted. And I think the reason is that on none of these inquiries have they looked at the airworthiness of the Chinook Mark II. One of the things that they did when a Chinook went down recently in Afghanistan was to look at the question of airworthiness. But that's been specifically excluded from all previous inquiries, the remit of all previous inquiries. And I think that stands in very stark contrast. We know that this Mark II, as the squadron leader has said, was not being used. It had been essentially grounded at its base at Boscombe Down. We know that the pilots knew that because they asked to fly alternative aircraft that were available because they regarded it as too dangerous. And one of the pilots even upped his life insurance before he got on the flight. So, there's quite a lot here about the unairworthiness. And so somebody gave an order that a non-airworthy aeroplane should be flown with passengers on and is now avoiding any kind of scrutiny and has avoided for 31 years any form of scrutiny. It's about time we understood, and particularly the families understood, what it is that went wrong.
Would a public inquiry garner any new outcome if it doesn't have access to the documents which have been sealed for 100 years?
Well, this is the key reason we've asked for a judge-led private inquiry, because the judge can look at the sealed documents. They're security cleared, and so they can look at these secret documents. And if there's something of probative value, they can use that to enhance their investigations. And to the extent that it's not truly secret, it's just being hidden for reasons of convenience and embarrassment. And we say, and the MOD say publicly that it's about the privacy of individuals, so that must be the individuals who gave the order, then in those circumstances the judge can look at that reasonably and proportionately and come to the proper conclusions. Okay. And no public inquiry has had that opportunity.
We must leave it there. Thank you both for joining us, gentlemen. Mark Stephens there, who represents the families of those who died that night. And before that, we heard from retired squadron leader Robert Burke, who was based at RAF Oldham at the time of the crash.